The Orioles made two more depth additions on minor league contracts over the weekend. One bringing back an old friend, and the other, a guy who actually could help this major league bullpen in 2025. Tell you about them both coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, February 10th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about two Orioles minor league signings as they have brought in both Terrin Vavra and right-handed pitcher Dylan Coleman on minor league deals. We'll talk about how each of them could help the Orioles potentially in the big leagues in 2025. And then also a report of some interest for the O's previously in Baltimore native Gavin. We'll touch on that at the end of the show as well. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. So let's begin things with our old friend Terrin Vavra, because officially he is back with the Orioles. Can't quit Terrin Vavra, as the Orioles have re-signed him to a minor league deal, which was reported late last week. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Vavra or his story with the Orioles so far, we can do the recap here. A 27-year-old left-handed hitting utility man who debuted with the Orioles in the major leagues in 2022. He was a former third-round pick by the Colorado Rockies out of Minnesota in 2018, and then was traded to the Orioles along with Michel Desaulnes and Tyler Nevin in the Michael Givens deal at the 2020 MLB trade deadline. Now, he came up in 2022, and honestly, he was a solid all-around bench player for the Orioles in 2022 down the stretch. They were trying to get to the postseason. Ultimately, they came up short, but Vavra was a nice piece. He played in 40 games, 103 plate appearances, basically a league average hitter. Hit 258, 340, 337, really flashed no power. He hit a home run on the final day of the season. That is still his only big league home run. But it was a 12% walk rate, which was good, a really low 18% strikeout rate, a league average 100 WRC plus in those first 40 games in the big leagues with the Orioles in 2022. And he showed enough where it was like, hey, we're not sure if he's a big league starter, but he can certainly be a big league bench player. So Vavra, of course, made the opening day roster in 2023 as one of the Orioles utility guys. And he wasn't playing every day, but didn't do a whole lot of damage when he was out there in 2023. He was sent to AAA on April 27th after he was struggling and the Orioles had other options. He came back up on May 9th and stuck around for another month, but went back down to AAA on June 6th of 2023, and that was pretty much it for him in the majors that year. He really wasn't hitting at all. The last time we saw him in the big leagues, 27 games, 56 plate appearances, a 64 WRC plus. Yes, he had a 245 average, but all 12 of his hits were singles in that 2023 season. Was hitting for no extra bases, no power whatsoever. So although he was walking a little bit, not striking out a lot, and 245 is not the worst average in the world, it was an empty 245. That leads to a 64 WRC plus for Terrin Vavra. And even though he could play a lot of positions, if you can't do anything of damage at all at the plate, it's tough to roster you on a 2023 team that obviously got a lot better and was looking to win a division. So he wasn't hitting it all. And then an injury came up, and it turned out to be a pretty major injury. It was a torn labrum where he needed surgery, and he was out for the remainder of the 2023 season. Now, he was very much still under contract with the Orioles, and the question kind of was, he's already a guy with no power. Shoulder injuries can really zap the power for hitters sometimes. What is Terrin Vavra going to be when he does return from this shoulder injury? Well, he got on the field back in AAA in May of 2024, but had more injuries, spent time on the IL in June and July of last year. The Orioles actually called him up for one day in the big leagues in 2024, called him up on July 30th, sent him back to AAA on July 31st. It doesn't even register on any of his, Fangraphs or Baseball Reference pages because he did not appear in that one game he was here for. the O's just needed a warm body. It was right around the trade deadline. They had just dealt away Austin Hayes, and they had just dealt away a couple of pitchers as well. Of course, Kyle Stowers, Connor Norby, and they just needed like healthy bodies to be on the roster for a day until everybody got to Baltimore that they traded for. And Vavra was one of those guys, but they didn't put him in the game, and I don't think they really planned to, and they sent him back to AAA the next day. And honestly, he wasn't very good in AAA either when he was down there. It's not like he had super earned the call-up. It was just, hey, let's get a utility guy up here in case anything happens. He can play a bunch of positions. Like, he had been good in AAA in 2023. He had a 127 WRC plus. He had an 88 WRC plus in 55 AAA games with Norfolk in 2024. He certainly was not producing there really at all. And he stuck in AAA for a while, and then the Orioles just kind of jettisoned him off the roster. They DFA'd him off the 40-man in August 21st of last year, and it looked like that could have been the end of his time with the O's. He was claimed on waivers by the Mariners. The Mariners sent him directly to AAA. He played 3 games in AAA Tacoma with the Seattle system, and then Seattle DFA'd him, and he cleared waivers, and he decided to become a free agent because I believe he had already cleared waivers once before with the Orioles. So because he did that again, he had the chance to refuse his assignment to AAA and say, I'm going to become a free agent. And that's what Vavra did. And I'm thinking he did that instead of sticking with the Mariners in AAA because I think he knew his old friends were going to come calling. And that is what happened because later in September, the Orioles re-signed Terrin Vavra to a minor league deal for the remainder of that season, just to have some depth in AAA. He still wasn't very good when he joined Norfolk in September, but it was nice to have him there. And now he is a player where there's really not a lot of stuff under the hood that's going to make you go, wow, it's not good hard hit rates. It's not good barrel rates. He's not lifting the ball in the air. Obviously, he has 1 career big league homer. He's not hitting for power whatsoever. The reason why you like Terrin Vavra is because he gets on base, fairly high walk rates, low strikeout rates. He puts the ball in play. He makes contact, and pretty good sweet spot rate. So although he doesn't square the ball up and drive it for power, he kind of has the mini Luis Arraez profile. He's not nearly the player Luis Arraez is, and that's why Vavra is a AAA player and Arraez is a big league player at this point. But it's that same kind of mold where you don't strike out a lot, you get a lot of contact made. It's not the best contact, but you know how to get the sweet spot of the bat on the ball. And that's how you turn a lot of different pitches into singles or doubles down the line or things like that to keep you somewhat productive as a hitter. And that's what Vavra can do when healthy. And also, he plays everywhere. I believe he's played every position but catcher and pitcher in the Orioles system at some point defensively. That's pretty valuable to have. Now, Vavra became a minor league free agent after the season. Obviously, he waited around for a while, and then the Orioles in February decided, let's just bring him back on a minor league deal, and that is what they did last week. I struggle to see a path for Vavra to play in the big leagues at all in 2025 unless he really turns things on. But again, maybe he'll finally be fully healthy coming off of that shoulder issue, and there's a chance the O's could need a utility man. He won't have a 40-man spot, but as I mentioned on yesterday's episode, he does have an invite to big league spring training as a non-roster invitee. But the Orioles just love him at depth. Again, like, he's played every position, infield, outfield, whatever you need. He's not the strongest defender in the world at any of those positions, but you can make up for that by the fact that you can be somewhat trusted in any of them. That gives you versatility. And when he was with the Orioles in the big leagues, he was considered their emergency catcher. So although he has not had to catch in a game yet, that is on his docket as well. Maybe he's a position player pitching option. Like, he can truly play everywhere if you need him to. Basically, it's a slap hitter with defensive versatility and zero power. You got to kind of be perfect. This is what when Vavra was back with the O's like in 2023, this is kind of what I talked about a lot. Like, if you're going to be that profile, the slap hitter who makes a lot of contact but has zero power, you need to be super elite at those skills to get to the big leagues. Luis Arraez is super elite at those skills. That is why he remains in the big leagues. Steven Kwan is a similar-ish player, but he has some pop and he plays gold glove defense. That is why Steven Kwan is an all-star level player in the big leagues. When you're Terrin Vavra, with this mix, the best you're going to be is kind of an up-down utility guy. You need to take it to a next level with your bat-to-ball skills to become a big league starter, and I just don't think that is in there for Terrin Vavra. But 2025 is going to be his first fully healthy season, presumably, since 2022. So maybe if he can get back to the player he was in that rookie year, right? If you're a 100 WRC plus with a lot of defensive versatility, that is a major league bench player. And maybe he can still find a way to get in there with the O's. And the Orioles, I know this, I've heard this from multiple people. They love the work ethic. Like, he's the son of a coach, one of the hardest workers he's been in this organization. If anybody's going to come back better from this injury, it's going to be a guy like Terrin Vavra. The O's love that. And just having that depth in AAA, a guy who can play every single position if you need it, is nice to bring in for depth really at this point in the offseason. But the Orioles made another minor league signing over the weekend. And this one, Dylan Coleman, a lot more interesting for his prospects to help the Orioles at the big league level. I'll tell you, who is Coleman and what can he do on the mound? That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature is also great because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. You never feel like you missed your chance to get that wager in. And plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So from Terrin Vavra, we move on to right-handed pitcher Dylan Coleman, who the Orioles also reportedly signed to a minor league deal over the weekend. It was Coleman himself, I believe, who announced it on his Instagram account on Saturday. I don't think we've gotten the official transaction from the Orioles, but it's pretty much assumed it is a minor league deal with an invite to big league spring training as another one of those non-roster invitees that I talked about on yesterday's episode, that Sunday pod. Make sure to go check that one out if you have not already. But let's talk about who is Dylan Coleman. Well, he is a 28-year-old right-handed pitcher, a reliever at this point in his career, who was last with the Houston Astros, but was released by Houston in August. This is his first team since then. Now, Coleman in AAA last year had quite an interesting season at the AAA level for Houston. He pitched in 36 games, threw exactly 36 innings, was basically a one-inning guy, 42 strikeouts in 36 innings. That's a good number. That's a really good strikeout rate. Also 42 walks in 36 innings. That's right. He threw 36 games and had an equal amount of strikeouts and walks. That is heavily concerning, but that is what you get at this point with Dylan Coleman. And because of all those walks, he posted a 6.50 ERA in AAA. He pitched in one big league game for the Astros, I believe, in April of last year, and did throw a scoreless inning. Walked a batter, struck out a batter, of course. But other than that, did not appear in the bigs last year. Now, in AAA, here's what his pitch mix looked like. It was a three-pitch mix, starting with a four-seam fastball that averaged about 96 miles an hour. He threw it about 48% of the time. It's got good velocity. It doesn't have the biggest ride, but it's a solid fastball, and the opponents hit only 176 against it in AAA. Then he's got his sweeper. That is the bread and butter sweeping slider. Throws it at 82 miles an hour, used it about 27% of the time. Expected batting average against it in AAA last year was 134. It got an elite 40% swing and miss rate, just a 16% hard hit rate, and he did not allow even one barrel against that sweeper last year. It was a dominant AAA pitch. And then you have the cutter. So sweeper to get righties out, cutter to get lefties out. Cutter he throws 24% of the time, also had a 40% swing and miss rate. Difference with the cutter is instead of a 16% hard hit rate, it got hit hard 50% of the time, and opponents hit 333 against that cutter in AAA next year. So that pitch might need a little bit of a tweak if he is going to get back to the big leagues. Now, the history of Coleman and why people are so intrigued by Dylan Coleman is that fourth-round pick out of Missouri State by the Padres back in 2018, got to high A with San Diego in 2019. Then, of course, the 2020 minor league season was canceled, and at the end of that season, he was traded as a player to be named later in a deal to the Kansas City Royals. Now, he put it all together in 2021 in the Kansas City system, got to AA, got to AAA, and actually debuted in the major leagues late in 2021. He was a high A player that then the next year got to the big leagues with Kansas City. That is how fast he rose through their system. It was actually pretty impressive what he was able to do with the Royals, was putting up these insane numbers. Like in AAA with Kansas City in 2022, or excuse me, in 2021, before he got to the big leagues, he was posting a 42% strikeout rate. That is an absurd strikeout rate. And the Royals were like, we got to get this guy to the big league. So they did so. And then he made the opening day bullpen in 2022. He was really good. He was really, really good. Now, there was a little bit of a concern with a 13% walk rate to a 25% strikeout rate. You do not want to be walking 13% of the batters you face. League average walk rate's about 8%, but still, he threw 68 innings in 68 games out of the Royals bullpen. He was one of their main middle relievers, and he posted a 2.78 ERA in his age 25 season. Now, he did have a 3.88 FIP and a 4.38 xFIP, so the underlying stuff was like, he's not going to be this good for this long, but it was a really good season for Dylan Coleman, and the Royals were like, we found, at the very least, a good middle reliever of the future. So, of course, he makes the opening day roster again in the bullpen in 2023, and it all kind of falls apart on him. Everything he did in 2022, well, that went away. He was walking everyone. He appeared in just 23 big league games. He threw 18 and a third innings, 21 strikeouts to 19 walks and 5 hit batters in that 2023 season. It was an 8.84 ERA. The stuff was all over the place, and his velo fell apart. His fastball, which he used to throw 98, was one of the hardest average fastballs in Major League Baseball, dropped almost 3 miles per hour on average from 2022 to 2023. The command was gone. The velocity was gone. And it was like, what in the world is happening with Dylan Coleman? So he went down to AAA because the Royals were like, this is unplayable at this point. He goes to AAA and he's much better there. I mean, 31 innings and a 4.70 ERA is much more playable, but still, even though his strikeout numbers went back up, which was good to 33%, he was walking 22% of the batters he was facing in AAA. Like, that was more than he was walking in the big leagues when he was struggling. It was just like, this guy has this electric stuff. His sweeper had some of the most movement of any slider in all of Major League Baseball. He had still solid velocity on the fastball, even though it was down. It was like, this guy has big league level, good to great stuff out of the bullpen. He just at times has no idea where it's going. So the Royals were like, we're tired of this. After the 2023 season, they make a minor trade and they deal him to the Astros. And again, he appears in one Astros big league game, pitches in AAA. The stuff was still good. The command still horrendous. Now, the Orioles bring him in on a minor league deal. He gets an invite to big league spring training. He will certainly compete in camp. I doubt that he will get a opening day roster spot, but here's why I've been teasing, hey, I think he could help the Orioles bullpen this year. You kind of look at his stuff and look at what he did, especially back in 2022 when he was good. Like, his sweeper moves more than almost anybody else's. It moves way more than the average sweeper. His cutter it's more like a hard slider than a cutter, really. It's, 88 miles an hour. And I think the Orioles could tweak that a bit, the shape of it, to make it better against lefties. Maybe they can have him add a changeup instead of the cutter to get lefties out. But the four-seam fastball velocity, it did tick back up last year. After being way down in 2023, it started rising again, which is a good sign. And that sweeper is still just an elite pitch if he can start to command it a little bit better. So it's going to be a project for the Orioles. Like, he's going to be in the Tides bullpen to start the year. He is not going to be in Baltimore. But the stuff is so intriguing that you can dream on it. Now, he could end up being a guy who just is in AAA, can't get the command around. He stays in the Tides bullpen. The Orioles let him walk after 2025. That is certainly a possibility. But there's also the possibility he figures it out, and you have the next Colin Selby. Now, I know that Colin Selby didn't pitch much for the Orioles last year, a couple of games in the regular season, made the postseason roster as well. But Selby was a guy who was bouncing around with different teams, including the Royals, had this amazing stuff, just didn't have the right shape and command. Orioles brought him in on waivers, kind of changed his approach. I think Colin Selby could be a big part of the Oriole bullpen in 2025. Maybe Dylan Coleman is that next guy who they see the shapes, they can tweak some things, tweak the delivery, whatever it may be, and he can become dominant. It is in there. And yes, this is not the Dylan C that the Orioles wanted, or at least the Orioles fans wanted to acquire. Maybe that one's still on the table. But Dylan Coleman, something I really want to watch as well in big league spring training and when he gets to AAA to see, hey, is that command coming around? Are the pitch shapes changing? He's got the goods to be a big leaguer and a good big leaguer, and he's put it together for a full season just 3 years ago. He could do it again at age 28. This is definitely a depth piece where I really like the Orioles going and getting Coleman and saying this guy could actually help us in 2025. And I would not be surprised if he did, maybe out of the bullpen at some point in the second half. But one more thing to get to on this episode, a guy that the Orioles have not signed to a minor league deal, although it still could happen. He's still out there. Baltimore native Gavin Sheets. Apparently there was a little interest from the Orioles earlier this offseason. We'll talk about that to finish up the show coming up next. So we had a little Q&A that was done by Rock Kabako over at Masson over the weekend, which picked up a lot of traction because of his talk about the trade talks with the San Diego Padres for Dylan Cease. Don't worry, we will get to that on tomorrow's episode. But the other thing that came out of that Q&A that Rock reported was that the Orioles, at least earlier in the offseason, had interest in Gavin Sheets, Baltimore native Gavin Sheets. Now, he is still a free agent. He was non-tendered by the White Sox earlier this offseason. He has still not been signed by anyone. 28-year-old left-handed hitting, listed as an outfielder, but at this point he's a first baseman and DH. It is really tough sometimes watching him out there in the corner outfield. Bigger guy that just cannot move super well out there. But Rock reported that the Orioles had checked in on Sheets earlier in the offseason. He also kind of said that it seems like they're past that point now, that not as much interest anymore, but at least had checked in on him. And it's just interesting to talk about because he's a Baltimore native, son of former Oriole Larry Sheets, who played for the O's from 1984 to 89, was part of the Why Not Orioles in 89 before he left. And then Sheets played high school in the area, went to Wake Forest, was a second-round pick of the White Sox back in 2017, moved through their system quickly, got to the big leagues in 2021, and had a really good rookie year. Kind of end of the year, 54 games, 123 WRC+, hit for some power, hit for some average, didn't strike out a ton, walked some. Like, he looked like a really nice player to have in their lineup. And then it just kind of went away. Since that 2021 season, Sheets has not even been a league average hitter. He's been an everyday player pretty much for the White Sox. Not an everyday player. He sits against some lefties, but generally an almost everyday player for the last 3 years. And his WRC plus is 99, 61, and 88 the last 3 seasons for Gavin Sheets. Now, there's still something in that bat. Like, his StatCast page has been super, super ugly. Hard hit rates, barrel rates, all that stuff way down. But the sweet spot percentage was one of the best in baseball last year. Top 10 in sweet spots percentage. That means there is some bat to ball skills that are still in there. And he's a big guy. He's got raw power. He's not tapping into it at all for some reason. Like, he hit 11 home runs in 54 games in his first season. Next 3 years, he played at least 118 games and then hit 15, 10, and 10 home runs. So basically the same amount of homers in double and almost triple the games in the next 3 seasons. Like, for some reason, just not tapping into that power. Slash 233, 303, 357, 9% walk rate, 21% K rate for an 88 WRC plus in about 500 plate appearances in 139 games for the White Sox in 2024. And then he basically got too expensive for them and they non-tendered him. But I think an interesting depth move with the way the Orioles roster is shaked out. You're looking at Heston Kjerstad and Ryan O'Hearn and Tyler O'Neill and Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo knocking on the door. This opening day roster, there's just not really a place for Gavin Sheets, but I think there's still power to be tapped back into. And maybe if the Orioles could bring him in, again, on a depth minor league deal, put him in big league camp, put him in AAA, work with him on getting to that power, could be a nice buy low candidate maybe for somebody or potentially the Orioles. Like, yeah, not much of a path to MLB playing time, certainly for Gavin Sheets. But the only true first baseman at AAA right now is T.T. Bowens, who made it up there last year, former undrafted free agent by the Orioles in 2020, who's been a nice story in their system. Otherwise, at this point, unless there's an injury, Kobe Mayo will probably start the season in AAA, and he's probably going to get a lot of the reps over at first base because the Orioles have kind of said it already. They figure Mayo's going to be more of a first baseman than a third baseman when he eventually settles in at the big league, so he'll get a lot of those reps in Norfolk. Bowens is there too, but I think there would be space for Sheets in AAA to get some at-bats and continue to work on things, certainly, if the Orioles thought, hey, there's something there to turn things around, and you have the Orioles connection with his dad, Larry Sheets, and why not? I know that fans, for some reason, get upset. They make snarky comments about minor league deals. Go look around baseball. Like, every single team brings in dozens of players, seemingly, on minor league deals every offseason because there's no downside to it. You bring them in. At worst, they sit in AAA as depth. At the best, you find a Albert Suarez type diamond in the rough, and it helps you at the big league level. Like, they're very low cost. They don't take up roster spots. They go to AAA. They don't sit on the 40-man roster. You're not using them to block prospects. If you have a prospect in a spot, you're probably not bringing in a big name minor league free agent to take those at-bats in AAA. You're bringing in guys to have depth down there when guys do get injured, which happens to every team in the majors and minor leagues. There's just no downside. Like, oh, they're dumpster diving for players. Every single team in the league does this all the time. Every week, teams sign players to minor league deals. The Dodgers sign 1 million guys to minor league deals every year. I understand there's some people we can't get through to, but like, it's just depth. There's no such thing as bad depth or too much depth. Like, more depth is good. We saw that when the Orioles struggled offensively down the stretch last year. They had taken away from some of their depth, and when their guys got injured, it hurt them. They have now built up that depth this offseason with the Dylan Carlsons and the Ramon Laureanos and things like that. And some of these guys, these veterans that they've brought in on minor league deals that'll be in big league camp, that will be in AAA Norfolk, but can come to the big leagues. And again, Gavin Sheets could be one of those guys if the O's still had interest. Dylan Coleman, Terrin Vavra will be those guys in big league spring training and in AAA Norfolk if the Orioles need them. The more depth you have at AAA, the better when you start to run into potentially some injury or performance issues in the big leagues. It's just that simple. And the Orioles at this point, because they've traded guys and guys have gotten promoted, they just don't have the prospect depth in AAA that they've had for the past couple of years. And that's okay. That was supposed to happen. These guys were supposed to be traded for big leaguers, and we're supposed to graduate and help the Orioles in the big leagues like they're doing. So now you're in a little bit of a lull period with your system where you need to bring in more of these minor league free agent guys to sit in AAA Norfolk and be better depth until that next wave of Bradfields and Fabians and Beavers and Honeycutts and Griffo Farrell and Frederick Ben Cosme and all these guys start making their way up to AA and more so AAA, and then you refill that depth with your true prospects again. Like, this is how you manage a system. The Orioles are doing that right. They have done, we can have a different conversation about what they've done with the top end of the roster, not going out and getting an ace, but the Orioles have done an A-plus job in terms of improving the depth on this roster, not just with the depth of the major league guys, again, Ramon Laureano, Dylan Carlson, depth of the rotation with guys like Tomoyuki Sugano and Charlie Morton, but also all of this depth they are putting in AAA, kind of this break glass in case of emergency guys. I mean, Elias and his crew have done a fantastic job with that so far this offseason. And that'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Also, if you could subscribe wherever you listen, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps out the show. If you leave a 5-star rating and a review over there as well, that helps the pod as well. I will be back again tomorrow. Again, we are back on that 5-day per week schedule. The Orioles report spring training later this week, and we get things popping. We're going to talk about Dylan Cease tomorrow. Haven't talked about Dylan Cease in a little bit, but we got that report from Rock over the weekend that the Padres were checking in on some of the Orioles' biggest names. Kobe Mayo, Jordan Westberg, Samuel Basayo. Those are the kind of guys they want for Dylan Cease. And that may be why trade talks have kind of stalled here, because I don't think the O's want to give up those guys. So we'll talk about it. Should the Orioles trade one of those guys for Dylan Cease? And what would it take to not use them and potentially get Cease or another starter for the remainder of this offseason as the O's try to add an ace to the top of that rotation? But that's coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.